When Clark asked for a divorce after 13 years of marriage, I quietly agreed and signed the papers. But as he celebrated with his mistress at his parents' anniversary dinner, I approached their table with a smile. "Congratulations on your freedom," I said, sliding an envelope across the table. His smug expression vanished as he read the DNA test results proving our 3 children weren't his, they were his brother's. Blood-red wine spilling on crisp white tablecloth, that's what ended my marriage. Not with desperate pleas or heated arguments, but with the silent horror of discovery as I stood frozen in our kitchen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clark's phone in my trembling hands. I remember the exact moment perfectly. Thursday, 2:37 p.m. The twins were at soccer practice, Lily at her violin lesson. I had been checking our shared calendar to coordinate weekend plans when the message notification appeared. "Can't wait for tonight, babe. Kylie's taking the kids to her mother's. Our bed is waiting. Jade." The phone nearly slipped from my fingers, as 13 years of marriage crystallized into this single, damning piece of evidence. Clark Reynolds, respected neurosurgeon, my husband, father of our 3 children, had another woman in our bed when I was away. The carefully constructed reality I'd been living in shattered around me like fine crystal on marble flooring. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Clark's colleagues had called us the Golden Reynolds family. Him with his steady hands that saved lives daily, me with my unwavering support and dedication to our children. Our Tudor-style home in Oakwood Heights, with its meticulously landscaped garden and hand-carved front door, might as well have been a movie set. The perfect family personified. "Kimberly makes it all possible," he'd declare at hospital fundraisers, his arm around my waist, champagne flute in hand. I couldn't do what I do without her. The other doctors' wives would smile politely, but I could see the envy in their eyes. We had it all. 3 beautiful children, financial security, and a partnership that had weathered the grueling years of medical school, residency, and Clark's rise to prominence. Or so I thought. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs. Clark started working later, claiming the hospital was short-staffed after budget cuts. Weekend golf games with colleagues became more frequent. Our conversations grew shorter, more practical, scheduling the children's activities, discussing household needs, planning social obligations that would advance his career. When Clark was promoted to head of neurosurgery last winter, I organized a surprise party with all his colleagues. He smiled and thanked me publicly, but later complained I'd embarrassed him in front of the hospital board. That night, he slept in the guest room, claiming exhaustion. "It's the pressure," I told my sister on the phone the next day. "The promotion comes with so much responsibility." "Men in power often change, Kim," she warned. I dismissed her concern as cynicism from her own failed marriage. The physical distance grew too. Clark claimed fatigue from 16-hour surgeries when he turned away from my touch. I bought new lingerie, scheduled date nights, tried everything the women's magazines suggested to keep the spark alive. He participated half-heartedly, checking his phone throughout our carefully planned evenings. "Is everything okay between us?" I asked one night after he barely touched his favorite meal. Herb-crusted rack of lamb with rosemary potatoes? "Just tired, Kim. The Matthews case is complicated." Then he'd retreat to his home office, door closed, voice a low murmur as he took calls late into the night. I believed in trust. I believed in privacy. I never considered checking his phone or email. That was for insecure women, paranoid women, not for Kimberly Reynolds, the perfect wife, until our anniversary approached. I planned to surprise Clark with a romantic weekend in Sedona where we'd honeymooned. I needed to sync our calendars, and his phone was on the counter while he showered. One quick peek to ensure he was free that weekend. That's all I intended. The message notification appeared as I held his phone. "Jade Thompson, Last night was amazing. Can't wait to feel you inside me again. When are you leaving her? My finger trembled as I opened the message thread. Hundreds of texts dating back 10 months. Intimate photos. Plans made while I was taking Lily to her recital or helping the twins with their science project. Cruel jokes at my expense. Clark. She's planning some big anniversary surprise. Jade. Poor thing still thinks there's something to celebrate. I quietly replaced the phone, made his coffee as usual, kissed him goodbye as he left for the hospital. Then I vomited until there was nothing left but bitter bile. That night, after the children were asleep, I confronted him in our bedroom, the same room where we'd conceived our children, where he'd comforted me through my mother's death. Are you sleeping with Jade Thompson? My voice was surprisingly steady. Clark didn't even flinch. He removed his watch, placed it methodically on his nightstand. Yes. How long? Does it matter? He looked at me with such coldness I didn't recognize him. I want a divorce, Kimberly. The calculated cruelty of his tone shocked me more than the words. This wasn't a confession. This was an execution. Why? I whispered. I've outgrown this life. Outgrown us. He gestured around our bedroom as if it were a prison cell. I've given 13 years to this marriage, to these children. I'm 42. If I'm going to start over, it needs to be now. Start over? We built this life together, Clark. Everything you are, everything I am. His laugh was bitter. I save lives daily. What do you do, Kimberly? Bake cookies for school fundraisers? Organize my sock drawer? I built this life despite the anchor of domesticity. His words struck like physical blows. I'd put my own interior design career on hold to support his medical school dreams, managed our home and children so he could focus on advancing his career, hosted countless dinner parties with hospital administrators to help him network. You'll be taken care of financially, he continued, as if discussing a business transaction. The children will adjust. Children always do. That night he slept in the guest room. I lay awake reconstructing the past 13 years, wondering if anything had been real. In the morning, he left for the hospital before dawn. On the kitchen counter, he'd left a business card for his lawyer. The perfect life I thought we'd built had been a mirage. The cracks had always been there. I'd just been too dedicated to our illusion to see them. What I didn't know then was that the text messages and affair were just the visible fractures in a foundation that had been compromised. From the beginning, Clark's betrayal ran deeper than I could possibly imagine, and the true nature of his deception would soon turn my world upside down in ways that would make his affair seem trivial by comparison. The day after Clark left his lawyer's card, I made an appointment with Chloe Winters, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Oakwood Heights. Her office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building, all glass, chrome, and intimidation. Tell me everything, she instructed, her voice crisp and professional as I sat across from her imposing desk. Not just what you think is relevant. Everything. For 2 hours, I laid out the timeline of our marriage, the early years of struggle through medical school, the fertility challenges, the gradual rise in Clark's career and status, and finally, the devastating discovery of his affair. Chloe listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she removed her glasses and studied me with an appraising look. Mrs. Reynolds, in my 20 years practicing family law, I've seen hundreds of unfaithful spouses. But something about your husband's behavior suggests this goes beyond a typical midlife crisis affair. What do you mean? I asked. The calculated nature of his actions, the immediate push for divorce without attempting reconciliation, the dismissive attitude toward the children. It suggests he's been planning this exit for some time. She tapped her pen against the desk. Which makes me wonder what else he might be hiding. Her first instruction was clear. Document everything, Kimberly, especially the finances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, after tucking the children into bed with reassurances that Daddy's just busy at the hospital, I opened our home safe. Inside lay 13 years of financial records, tax returns, investment statements, property deeds. As I sorted through the papers, discrepancies began to emerge like dark threads in what I'd thought was a seamless fabric. Monthly withdrawals, $6,000, $8,500, sometimes $12,000 from our joint savings account to an entity called Lakeview Holdings. No explanation. No paper trail showing where this money ultimately went. Over the past 3 years, nearly $300,000 had disappeared. I spread the bank statements across our kitchen table, circling dates and amounts in red. The pattern was clear. The withdrawals had started shortly after the twins' 5th birthday, gradually increasing in frequency and amount. Each withdrawal occurred on days when Clark was supposedly attending medical conferences or working overnight shifts. I contacted our bank the next morning. The account manager was hesitant, citing privacy policies, but eventually confirmed what I'd already suspected. Lakeview Holdings was a limited liability company registered solely in Clark's name. The money trail ended there. Is this normal in divorces? I asked Chloe during our follow-up meeting, sliding the bank statements across her mahogany desk. Hidden assets? Unfortunately, yes. She examined the documents through tortoiseshell reading glasses. But this pattern suggests something more calculated, something long-term. A thorough search of our home office yielded more questions than answers. I found receipts for expensive dinners I'd never known about, credit card statements showing jewelry purchases I'd never received, and travel itineraries for weekend trips that had supposedly been medical conferences. The children sensed the tension, despite my efforts to maintain normalcy. Lily, perceptive at 12, cornered me one evening while I was preparing dinner. "Is Dad coming home tonight?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "He has a late surgery, honey," I replied, the practiced lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "He always has a late surgery now." Her eyes, so like Clark's, held mine steadily. "Are you and Dad getting a divorce?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd been trying to protect them, to maintain some semblance of normalcy until I understood the full scope of what we were facing. But Lily's directness demanded honesty. "We're going through some challenges right now," I admitted, setting down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables. "Your dad and I need to work some things out." "Because of the lady in the red car?" I froze. "What lady in the red car, Lily? The one who picks Dad up sometimes when he thinks we're not looking. I saw them from my bedroom window." She shrugged with forced nonchalance that broke my heart. "They kiss, like in the movies." The casual revelation that my daughter had witnessed her father's infidelity firsthand filled me with cold fury. Clark hadn't even had the decency to keep his affair away from our children. It was during this conversation with Chloe that she mentioned Dr. Timothy Brooks. "The name came up in another case of mine," she explained. "Former colleague of your husband. Left Westlake Medical Center 2 years ago under interesting circumstances. Might be worth a conversation." I remembered Dr. Brooks vaguely. Quiet, dedicated, always slightly uncomfortable at hospital functions. He'd simply vanished from the medical community without explanation. Clark had dismissed my questions with professional differences, nothing interesting. As I drove home from Chloe's office, my phone rang with an unknown number. Answering on the car's Bluetooth, I was surprised to hear a woman's voice, tense and hurried. "Mrs. Reynolds? My name is Amanda Fletcher. I used to work as a nurse at Westlake's fertility clinic." She paused. "I think we need to talk about your husband and your children." "My children? What about my children?" Alarm shot through me. "Not over the phone," she insisted. "Can you meet me tomorrow? The Bluebird Cafe on Marshall Street? Come alone. She hung up before I could ask more questions, leaving me gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. That night, I couldn't sleep. While Clark was supposedly working late, though I now knew better, I sat in our bedroom going through old photo albums. The twins' birth after our second round of IVF. Lily's arrival 3 years later. The christenings, birthdays, family vacations. At the Reynolds Lake House. In every photo, Clark looked the perfect father, proud, attentive, involved. Had it all been an act? And what did Amanda Fletcher know about our children that could possibly connect to Clark's professional misconduct? As dawn broke, I made a decision. It was time to stop reacting and start investigating. If Clark had secrets, I would uncover them all. I wouldn't just be fighting for my dignity or financial security, I would be fighting for the truth about my family's very foundation. The Bluebird Cafe was nearly empty when I arrived the next morning. Amanda Fletcher sat in a corner booth, nervously shredding a paper napkin. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s perhaps, with tired eyes and premature worry lines etched across her forehead. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I've debated contacting you for years." "Years?" I repeated. "What exactly do you know about my family, Ms. Fletcher?" She looked around furtively before leaning forward. "I know that the children you believe are your husband's biologically aren't." "What did you just say?" My voice came out as barely a whisper, my coffee untouched before me. Amanda Fletcher glanced around nervously before sliding a manila folder across the table. "I brought documentation. I've been keeping records since I first noticed the irregularities." With trembling fingers, I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of medical charts, lab reports, and handwritten notes, all bearing the Westlake Medical Center logo. "I was a fertility nurse for 9 years, Amanda explained quietly. "I assisted with hundreds of IVF procedures, including yours. 3 rounds, if I remember correctly. 1 successful round for the twins, another for your daughter, plus an unsuccessful attempt." I nodded, unable to speak as I scanned the documents. Clinical language describing procedures I'd undergone. Dates that matched my calendar. Familiar case numbers. About 5 years ago, I began noticing discrepancies in some files. Specimen, labels that didn't match documentation, consent forms with suspicious signatures, data that changed between collection and implementation. She took a deep breath. "Your husband was overseeing the fertility program then. He had final approval on all procedures." "What are you saying?" I asked, though the terrible truth was already forming in my mind. "Your husband systematically altered records for certain IVF patients, particularly those with connected families or substantial wealth. In your case..." She hesitated. "In your case, he personally oversaw the substitution of donor sperm for his own." The cafe seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table, struggling to process her words. "That's impossible," I said, finally. "Clark wanted children. We tried for years." Amanda's eyes were sympathetic but firm. "Mrs. Reynolds, please look at the lab form on page 4. I fumbled through the papers, finding the form she referenced. It was a specimen processing document with handwritten notations in the margins. Specimen substitution authorized by Dr. C. Reynolds. Replace CR0423 with JR0584. Cite quality concerns if questioned. No donor ID to be recorded in official file. JR0584. I read aloud, the code meaningless to me. "JR stands for Jonathan Reynolds," Amanda said softly. "Your brother-in-law." The room went silent. I could hear only the rushing of blood in my ears as 13 years of my life. Of love. Of motherhood. Of family, realigned around this impossible revelation. "Jonathan?" I finally managed. "Clark used Jonathan's... Jonathan is the biological father of my children?" Amanda nodded grimly. Based on the records I salvaged, yes. Your husband ensured his own sperm was never used in your procedures. He substituted his brother's sample instead. But why? Why would he do this? I don't know for certain, she admitted. That's what troubled me enough to keep these records. It wasn't just a medical error, it was deliberate deception. Multiple staff members were involved, all following Dr. Reynolds's explicit instructions. My mind raced through implications, possibilities, years of family dynamics suddenly cast in sinister light. Jonathan and his wife Kylie had struggled with infertility for years. Clark had overseen Jonathan's fertility testing personally at Westlake, diagnosing him with severe sperm motility issues. Yet apparently, his sperm had been viable enough to father my 3 children. There were others too, Amanda continued. At least 7 families whose IVF procedures were similarly manipulated. In some cases, Dr. Reynolds substituted anonymous donors. In others, he used specific donors without consent. How did no one notice this? How could this happen in a reputable hospital? Amanda's laugh was bitter. Dr. Reynolds controlled the program completely. Anyone who raised concerns was transferred, fired, or discredited. I stayed silent for years out of fear. But when I saw the news about your divorce, she trailed off. You knew I deserved the truth, I finished for her. She nodded. I have no stake in your marriage, Mrs. Reynolds. But as a medical professional, and as a mother myself, I believe in informed consent. You and your children were denied that fundamental right. I stared at the incriminating documents, my world collapsing, and reforming around this new reality. The twins had Jonathan's eyes. I'd remarked on the family resemblance many times, never suspecting the literal truth behind it. Lily had his musical ability, his gentle temperament. What happened to you? I asked Amanda. After you discovered this? I was offered a promotion to an administrative position away from the fertility clinic. When I declined, citing family reasons, they eliminated my position entirely. Classic constructive dismissal. She shrugged. I work at an urgent care center now, lower pay, but I sleep at night. Do you have evidence that would stand up legally? In court? Some of it, yes. These are copies. I have originals in a safe deposit box. There's also Dr. Brooks. He discovered similar irregularities and tried to address them through proper channels. That's why he was forced out. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. The grave tone in her voice sent a chill through me. What is it? 2 months ago, Dr. Mercer, who ran the clinic with your husband, died unexpectedly. Heart attack, allegedly. The week before, he had contacted me asking about my records. He sounded afraid, Mrs. Reynolds. He mentioned a trust, inheritance, complications. Said Dr. Reynolds was tying up loose ends. The implications were clear and terrifying. How far would Clark go to protect his secret? To tie up loose ends? I need to understand everything, I said with newfound determination. From the beginning, every detail, every document, every person involved. For the next hour, Amanda walked me through the elaborate scheme, pointing out dates, authorizations, and procedural notes that painted a damning picture of methodical fraud. With each revelation, my shock hardened into resolve. What you do with this information is your choice, Amanda said finally, gathering her things to leave. But be careful. Your husband has powerful connections and a lot to lose. Thank you for your courage, I said, meaning it deeply. What made you keep these records all this time? She paused, considering. We take an oath as medical professionals. First, do no harm. What happened at that clinic violated everything I believe in. Someone needed to remember the truth. After she left, I remained at the table, staring at my cold coffee. The cafe had filled with morning customers, normal people having normal days, unaware that a few tables away, a woman's entire understanding of her family had just been shattered. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls in succession. First, to Chloe Winters, then to Dr. Timothy Brooks, and finally to a genetic testing service recommended by Amanda. Each conversation was brief, focused, and marked by a calmness I didn't feel. By the time I left the cafe, carrying the folder of evidence, in my purse, the shock had crystallized into something harder, colder, more focused. This wasn't just about a faithless husband or a messy divorce. This was about a fundamental betrayal that had begun before my children were even conceived. A betrayal that would require nothing less than the complete dismantling of Clark Reynolds' carefully constructed life to address. The truth about my children's paternity changed everything, and I was just beginning to understand how deep the deception went. It took 4 calls to track down Dr. Timothy Brooks. His current practice, a modest family clinic 35 miles outside the city, was a far cry from the prestigious position he'd once held at Westlake Medical Center. His receptionist was protective, but when I mentioned Amanda Fletcher's name, she immediately transferred me. "Mrs. Reynolds?" His voice carried a weight that made my stomach tighten. "I've been expecting this call for years." We arranged to meet that afternoon at a coffee shop halfway between our locations. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with a view of both entrances, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid just days ago, but now felt necessary. Dr. Brooks entered precisely at 3 Bao, scanning the room before approaching. He had aged considerably since I'd last seen him at a hospital fundraiser. Deep lines around his eyes, prematurely gray hair, shoulders slightly stooped. He ordered black coffee and studied me with a clinical gaze. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly after settling into his seat. "I just didn't know which of us would break first, me with my conscience or Clark with his arrogance." "Amanda Fletcher gave me some information," I began, keeping my voice steady, "about the fertility clinic at Westlake, about my children." Dr. Brooks nodded grimly. "Amanda was one of the few who kept records. Brave woman. She said you discovered irregularities, too. The fertility clinic at Westlake had systemic problems," he explained, voice barely above a whisper despite the cafe's ambient noise. Several couples reported failed IVF procedures despite optimal conditions. I noticed inconsistencies in the lab reports, slight differences in documentation versus actual procedures. My hands trembled around my untouched latte. We had gone through 2 rounds of IVF to conceive the twins, another for Lily. Each failure had been devastating, each success miraculous, or so I'd thought. I began investigating quietly. The clinic director, Dr. Mercer, was falsifying results, substituting specimens, manipulating success rates to maintain the clinic's reputation and funding. When I confronted him, he admitted Clark was aware, more than aware, complicit. "Why?" I pressed. "What possible reason could justify this kind of deception?" Dr. Brooks hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "Initially, I believed it was career advancement. Mercer was on the board that later promoted Clark to department head. But with your case," he paused. "With your case, I became convinced there was something more specific at stake." He slid a thumb drive across the table. Hospital records, lab reports, Clark's signature authorizing procedural modifications, his euphemism for tampering with specimens, including yours. "Amanda mentioned the Reynolds Family Trust," I said. "Something about inheritance complications." Dr. Brooks's eyebrows raised slightly. "She told you about that?" "Yes, that's the piece I couldn't confirm but strongly suspected. Clark's father, Henry Reynolds, is one of Westlake's biggest benefactors. Old money, traditional values." "What does that have to do with my IVF procedures?" "Have you ever read Henry Reynolds' biography, the one published for the hospital's centennial?" I shook my head. Henry Reynolds himself was adopted, discovered it late in life when he needed a kidney transplant and found no genetic matches in his family. It apparently affected him deeply. This disconnect between biological heritage and family identity. A cold suspicion formed in my mind. "Are you suggesting—" I'm suggesting that Henry Reynolds, who controls a fortune worth well over $50 million, might have very specific views about biological legacy, and that his son might go to extraordinary lengths to secure that legacy. The implication was staggering. I remembered Clark's insistence on having children, his determined pursuit of IVF despite the physical and emotional toll it took on me, his keen interest in announcing each pregnancy to his parents before anyone else. "I need to see Henry Reynolds's will," I said, the pieces starting to align in my mind. "That would certainly clarify things," Dr. Brooks agreed. "But wills are private documents unless they've gone through probate. My attorney might be able to help," I mused, already planning my next conversation with Chloe Winters. "Dr. Brooks, why didn't you report this? Take it to the medical board?" His smile was sad, resigned. "I did, multiple times. Each complaint mysteriously disappeared. Each investigation was closed before it began. The Reynolds family doesn't just donate to Westlake, they practically own it. The South Wing literally bears their name. So you left instead. I was given a choice: resign quietly with a neutral recommendation or face fabricated accusations of prescription drug mismanagement that would end my career entirely." His hands tightened around his coffee cup. "I had a family to support. I chose survival. I thought of my own children, the twins now 9, Lily 12, blissfully unaware that their entire existence was the product of calculated deception." "What would you do?" I asked suddenly. "If you were me, knowing what you know, what would you do?" Dr. Brooks considered the question carefully. "Truth is rarely simple, Mrs. Reynolds. Revealing it comes with consequences. Some predictable, others not." He met my gaze directly. "But living with deliberate deception is its own kind of prison, for you and for your children." We talked for another hour, methodically working through what he knew, what he suspected, and what remained unknown. The picture that emerged was damning. A years-long conspiracy involving multiple medical professionals, all orchestrated by my husband for reasons that still weren't entirely clear. As our meeting concluded, Dr. Brooks hesitated before adding, "There's one more thing you should consider, Mrs. Reynolds. If Clark used Jonathan's sperm for your IVF procedures, does Jonathan—" "No." The question hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't considered Jonathan's potential involvement, or victimhood. The implications were dizzying. "I don't know," I admitted. "Jonathan and his wife Kylie have been trying to have children for years. Clark diagnosed Jonathan with severe fertility issues." "Diagnosed him personally?" Dr. Brooks asked sharply. "Yes. Clark insisted on handling it himself. Said it was better to keep it in the family, given the sensitivity." Dr. Brooks's expression darkened. "Mrs. Reynolds, I reviewed hundreds of files during my investigation. Your brother-in-law's fertility assessment might be worth examining more closely." Driving home, my mind raced with new questions and disturbing possibilities. If Clark had lied about Jonathan's fertility, what else had he lied about? Was Jonathan complicit in this deception, or another victim? And what of Kylie, who had endured years of painful, unsuccessful fertility treatments? I pulled into our driveway just as the twins' school bus arrived. Watching them bound toward me, backpacks bouncing, their faces alight with the simple joy of seeing their mother, I felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. These were my children, regardless of biology. Whatever Clark's motives, whatever truths, remained hidden. My love for them was the one uncomplicated certainty in this unraveling mess. That night, after the children were asleep, I collected DNA samples, hair from their brushes, saliva from their toothbrushes. I included one of Clark's combs from the master bathroom he no longer used. Then I carefully packaged everything according to the testing service's instructions. The truth, whatever it revealed, was coming. And I would be ready. The DNA testing service promised results within 2 weeks. While waiting, I focused on uncovering the financial motivation behind Clark's elaborate deception. Chloe Winters had connections throughout the legal community, including a former colleague who specialized in trust and estate law. If we're going to understand the Reynolds family trust, we need someone on the inside, Chloe explained during our strategy session. Someone with legitimate access to those documents. What about Eleanor Reynolds? I suggested. Clark's mother has always been kind to me, even after the separation. Chloe considered this. Possible, but risky. We don't know where her loyalties lie in this situation. There's Phil Roberts, I remembered suddenly. The hospital's financial officer. He's retiring next month after 30 years. He and Henry Reynolds go way back. 2 days later, I sat across from Phil Roberts in a quiet booth at the back of Marino's Steakhouse. In his 70s, with shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, Phil had the cautious manner of a man who had witnessed decades of hospital politics and kept most of what he knew to himself. I appreciate you meeting me, Mr. Roberts, I began. Phil, please. He studied me carefully. I've known your father-in-law for 40 years, known your husband since he was in medical school. This divorce business is unfortunate. It's more than a divorce, Phil, I said quietly, sliding across the table a carefully redacted version of Amanda Fletcher's documentation. Enough to establish the pattern of fraud without revealing the personal details about my children. His expression remained neutral as he reviewed the papers, but I noticed his hands tighten slightly around his water glass. Where did you get these? He asked finally. Does it matter? Are they accurate? Phil removed his glasses, polishing them methodically with his napkin, a delaying tactic while he considered his response. What exactly are you looking for, Mrs. Reynolds? The truth about the Reynolds family trust, specifically any conditions related to inheritance and biological heirs. Phil's silence told me I'd hit the mark. After a long moment, he sighed heavily. I'm retiring in 3 weeks. After 43 years in healthcare administration, the last thing I need is to be dragged into a legal battle between the Reynolds men. He paused. That said, I've never approved of how certain aspects of hospital operations were accommodated for certain individuals. From his briefcase, he withdrew a thin folder. The Reynolds Family Trust isn't actually confidential in its broad outlines. As a major hospital benefactor, its terms are referenced in numerous board documents and financial projections. The folder contained several pages of what appeared to be minutes from board meetings, financial forecasts, and correspondence. Phil pointed to a highlighted paragraph. In accordance with the updated terms of the Henry Reynolds Family Trust, 2010 revision, the primary inheritance, 42 Minater's current valuation plus controlling interest in Reynolds Holdings, passes to the first, son who produces biological male heirs to continue the Reynolds name, with DNA verification required upon Henry Reynolds' death or incapacitation. Secondary beneficiaries receive significantly reduced portions, $2 each. Biological male heirs, I repeated, with DNA verification. Phil nodded grimly. Henry Reynolds is old-fashioned about family legacy. When he discovered his own adoption, late in life, it apparently triggered an obsession with bloodlines. The 2010 revision made the biological component explicit and added the DNA testing requirement. And Clark knew about these terms? Both brothers did. It was no secret in the eye. Family. Jonathan's fertility issues essentially removed him from contention, leaving Clark as the presumptive heir, as long as he produced sons. The twins were boys, the perfect male heirs required by the trust. There's something else you should know, Phil added, his voice lowering. Henry Reynolds is dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He has months, maybe weeks. The timing suddenly made horrible sense. Clark's push for divorce, his relationship with Jade, his rush to finalize everything. With Henry's death imminent, the DNA verification would soon be triggered, revealing that the twins were not Clark's biological children. Unless, of course, he could somehow manipulate that test as well. "Thank you, Phil," I said finally. "This explains a lot." "Mrs. Reynolds," he cautioned as I gathered my things, "be careful. There's a great deal of money at stake here. People have done far worse for far less." The warning echoed in my mind as I drove to my next destination, Jonathan and Kylie's house, across town. I had debated this visit extensively, unsure whether to confront Jonathan directly or continue gathering evidence. But time was running short, and I needed to know if he was complicit or another victim in Clark's scheme. Their home was smaller than ours, but meticulously maintained. Kylie's garden had won neighborhood awards 3 years running. I'd always felt a kinship with my sister-in-law, both of us supporting ambitious Reynolds men, both of us navigating the complex dynamics of the family. Jonathan answered the door, surprise evident on his face. "Kimberly, we weren't expecting you." "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. Is Kylie home?" "She's at her mother's with her sister. Bridal shower preparations." He hesitated, then stepped back. "Come in. Everything okay with the kids?" I followed him into their living room, noting the family photos arranged carefully on the walls, Jonathan and Kylie on their wedding day, with his parents on vacation. No children. Never children. "The kids are fine," I assured him, taking a seat on their sofa. "I actually wanted to talk to you about something else, about Westlake's fertility clinic." Jonathan's expression shifted subtly, a wariness entering his eyes. "What about it?" "I've recently learned some troubling information about the clinic's practices, about Clark's involvement in particular." "Clark's a brilliant doctor," Jonathan said automatically, the defensive response of a younger brother who had spent his life in his sibling's shadow. "Whatever you're going through with the divorce—" "This isn't about the divorce," I interrupted. "This is about the IVF procedures that gave me the twins and Lily, and about your fertility diagnosis." Jonathan went very still. "What are you talking about?" I chose my next words carefully, watching his reactions closely. "I have evidence that Clark deliberately manipulated records at the fertility clinic, that he substituted sperm samples, that he may have falsified your fertility diagnosis." Color drained from Jonathan's face. For a moment, I thought he might be acting, feigning shock at something he already knew. But the genuine confusion and distress in his expression couldn't be faked. That's impossible," he stammered. "Clark ran all the tests himself. He showed me the results. Did you ever get a second opinion? From another doctor at another facility?" "No." "Why would I? He's my brother. He's the fertility specialist." Jonathan's voice hardened. "What exactly are you suggesting, Kimberly?" I took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting that the fertility issues Clark diagnosed you with may not be accurate, that he might have deliberately misled you, and that—" I paused, the magnitude of the revelation still difficult to voice. "That you, not Clark, may be the biological father of my children." Jonathan stared at me in stunned silence, the implications cascading across his face: confusion, disbelief, outrage, and something else, a dawning, horrified comprehension. "The Reynolds Trust," he whispered. "The biological heirs requirement." I nodded. "You know about that?" "Of course. It's why—" He trailed off, looking suddenly ill. "It's why Clark was so insistent on handling my fertility testing personally. Why he was so quick to diagnose me as virtually sterile. So I wouldn't question, wouldn't think to—" He stood abruptly, pacing the room. "This is insane. You're telling me my brother lied about my fertility, then used my sperm for your IVF so he could claim the trust money? That the twins and Lily are biologically mine? That's monstrous. Even for Clark, that's unthinkable." "I've ordered DNA testing," I said quietly. "We'll know for certain in about a week." Jonathan sank back onto the couch, his expression haunted. "Does Kylie know about this?" "No. I came to you first. Thank God. He ran a hand through his hair. This would destroy her. All these years of treatments, procedures, disappointments, believing it was somehow her fault we couldn't conceive. The pain in his voice was raw, genuine. Whatever else might be true, Jonathan had not been complicit in his brother's scheme. He was another victim, manipulated in perhaps the cruelest way imaginable. What are you going to do? He asked finally. I don't know yet, I admitted. But with your father's condition worsening, decisions will need to be made soon. Jonathan looked up sharply. What about my father? I realized with a jolt that Jonathan didn't know. Your father has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Jonathan. He has weeks, maybe months. The news hit him visibly, another shock in a day already overflowing with them. Clark never said a word, he whispered. My own father is dying, and my brother didn't even tell me. The 2-week wait for DNA results stretched my nerves to the breaking point. I maintained a careful facade of normalcy, helping with homework, attending school functions, negotiating custody arrangements through our lawyers. Clark had accelerated. The divorce proceedings, pushing for a quick resolution before his father's health deteriorated further. His lawyer sent increasingly aggressive settlement proposals, each one more insulting than the last. They questioned my contribution to the marriage, my ability to financially support the children, even my emotional stability as a parent. The strategy was clear: intimidate me into accepting minimal support and limited custody before I discovered the full extent of Clark's deception. I responded with measured reasonableness that clearly unsettled them. You're being surprisingly cooperative, Clark remarked after one particularly tense mediation session. The children come first, I replied softly. I just want what's best for everyone. His confidence grew with each concession I appeared to bake. He brought Jade to school functions, introduced her to our friends, even had her stay overnight when the children visited his new downtown condominium, all while I quietly gathered evidence, documented interactions, and waited for the scientific proof that would shatter his carefully constructed plans. Jonathan and I spoke daily, navigating the strange new reality of our situation with cautious honesty. He hadn't yet told Kylie about the possibility that he was the biological father of my children. We'd agreed to wait for the DNA confirmation. I still can't believe he'd do this, Jonathan said during one of our conversations. To use his own brother this way? It's about more than the money, I suggested. It's about control. Clark has always needed to be the successful one, the one who achieved everything first. While ensuring I couldn't, Jonathan agreed bitterly. The perfect competitive strategy: sabotage your opponent while pretending to help him. I'd found an unexpected ally in Eleanor Reynolds, who had reached out after noticing my strained interactions with Clark at a school concert. Something isn't right with my son, she confided during tea at her home. He's always been ambitious, driven, but lately there's a coldness to him I don't recognize. I measured my response carefully, unwilling to reveal too much before I had concrete proof. People change, Eleanor. Sometimes we never really know someone, even after years together. She studied me with shrewd eyes that had witnessed decades of family dynamics. You know something, don't you? Something beyond this tawdry affair with that Thompson woman. I'm still trying to understand it myself, I admitted. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Henry's illness has accelerated things. Clark has been unusually interested in the trust details, the timeline for execution. She sighed heavily. We raised our sons to value family above all. Whatever's happening here feels wrong. The testing service called on a Monday morning, exactly 2 weeks after I'd submitted the samples. The woman's voice was professional, detached. We have your results, Mrs. Reynolds. Would you like me to email them, or would you prefer to discuss them over the phone? Email, I replied quietly, knowing I needed to see the evidence with my own eyes. The clinical language of the report couldn't soften the blow. The alleged father, Sample A is excluded as the biological father of the tested children. The probability of paternity is 0%. The alternative subject, sample C, cannot be excluded as the biological father of the tested children. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. I sat motionless at my kitchen table, staring at the indisputable evidence on my laptop screen. Despite everything I'd learned, everything I'd suspected, seeing the scientific confirmation still felt like a physical blow. My children, the 3 precious lives I'd carried, birthed, and raised, were biologically Jonathan's, not Clark's. I printed 3 copies, one for my lawyer, one for the safety deposit box I'd opened in my name only, and one that I slipped into a cream-colored envelope with the Westlake Medical Center logo, taken from Clark's home office during those weeks of pretending nothing had changed. My hands didn't shake anymore. The devastation had crystallized into something harder, colder, more focused. This wasn't just about an affair or hidden assets. This was about a fundamental betrayal that had begun before our children were even conceived. Clark had deprived me of choice. He had constructed an elaborate lie that shaped 13 years of my life, my identity as a mother, our children's very existence, all while positioning himself as the generous provider, the dedicated father, the brilliant surgeon, saving lives. The truth changed everything, and I now possessed the power to make sure it changed everything for him too. I called Jonathan immediately. "The results are back," I said without preamble. "They confirm everything. You are their biological father." His breathing sounded ragged on the other end of the line. "I need to tell Kylie," he said finally. "Before this goes any further, she needs to hear it from me." "I understand. Do you want me there?" "No. This has to be between us first. I'll call you afterward." My next call was to Chloe, who received the news with grim satisfaction. "This changes the entire divorce strategy," she confirmed, "and potentially triggers criminal charges, medical fraud at minimum." "I don't want to rush into criminal proceedings," I cautioned. "Not until we understand exactly how this affects the children legally and emotionally." "Agreed. But we should file for an emergency custody order immediately. Given the circumstances, no judge would allow Clark significant access to children who aren't biologically his and whom he's been deceiving for years." The strategy session with Chloe lasted 2 hours, mapping out legal, financial, and personal considerations. By the end, we had a multi-phase plan designed to methodically dismantle Clark's position while protecting the children from the worst of the fallout. I was preparing dinner when Jonathan called back, his voice tight with emotion. "How did Kylie take it?" I asked gently. "About as well as anyone could, given the circumstances. Shock, disbelief, anger, mostly at Clark. Then questions. So many questions I couldn't answer." He paused. "She wants to meet with you, to talk about everything." "Of course, whenever she's ready." "There's something else," he continued. "While I was telling Kylie, Clark called. Apparently, father has taken a turn for the worse. The family is gathering at the house tomorrow night for dinner, to say goodbye, essentially." My heart skipped. "All of us? The children too?" "That's what he said. Father specifically asked for everyone to be there. You, me, Kylie, the kids. One last family dinner." The timing couldn't have been more perfect, or more poignant. Henry Reynolds, patriarch of the dynasty, gathering his family one final time. Before the end. The very man whose trust requirements had motivated Clark's elaborate deception would now, unwittingly, provide the perfect stage for its exposure. "We'll be there," I promised. After hanging up, I stared at the cream-colored envelope containing the DNA results. The annual Reynolds family dinner had always been a formal affair. Crystal glasses, fine china, everyone dressed in their best. This year, it would be somber, given Henry's condition. The perfect setting for truth to finally emerge. My investigation had taken an unexpected turn when I hired a private investigator to look into Jade's background. I needed to understand whether she was an unwitting participant in Clark's schemes or another calculated piece on his chessboard. The report arrived that evening. Jade Thompson had been a patient at Westlake 3 years earlier, a routine appendectomy, complicated by a surgical error during Clark's oversight of the case. The hospital had settled quietly, with Clark personally overseeing her follow-up care. Their relationship had begun shortly after her final appointment. Another manipulation, another calculated move. Whether Jade knew about the broader deception remained unclear, but she was certainly no random affair. Clark had chosen her specifically, probably recognizing someone vulnerable to his attention and status. That night, as I laid out clothes for the family dinner, a conservative black dress for myself, proper attire for the children, I felt a strange calm descend. 13 years of living someone else's carefully constructed lie were about to end. Tomorrow night, truth would finally have its moment. The envelope with the DNA test results was ready. Every detail had been considered. It was time for Clark Reynolds to face the consequences of his deception. The Reynolds family estate stood on 3 manicured acres in the most exclusive neighborhood of Oakwood Heights. Built in the colonial revival style, with imposing white columns and perfect symmetry, it had always intimidated me, much like the family dynasty it represented. As I drove through the wrought iron gates with the children in the back seat, a sense of finality settled over me. The last time we had visited as a family, Clark and I had been the golden couple, the successful son and his devoted wife. Now I arrived as the soon-to-be ex, carrying evidence that would shatter the Reynolds' legacy forever. "Why is Dad meeting us here instead of coming with us?" Lily asked, smoothing her navy blue dress. "He had hospital rounds this morning," I explained, the practiced lie coming easily after months of covering for his absences. "He'll be here soon." The twins were uncharacteristically quiet in their matching blazers, sensing the somber occasion without fully understanding it. "Is Grandpa going to heaven?" 9-year-old Ethan asked suddenly. The innocent question caught me off guard. "Grandpa is very sick," I said carefully. "That's why it's important we all spend time together tonight." Eleanor greeted us at the door, her elegant appearance belying the strain evident in her eyes. "Thank you for coming, dear," she said, embracing me with genuine warmth. "Henry will be so pleased to see the children." The grand foyer bustled with activity, caterers arranging silver platters, staff polishing the antique sideboards, flowers being arranged in crystal vases. Despite Henry's condition, Eleanor had maintained the standards expected of a Reynolds. Family gathering. "Jonathan and Kylie are already here," she mentioned, leading us toward the formal living room. "They're with Henry in the study." My stomach tightened at the thought of seeing Kylie for the first time since the DNA revelation. We had spoken briefly by phone. A tense, tearful conversation filled with questions neither of us could fully answer yet. The children rushed ahead to find their cousins, leaving Eleanor and me momentarily alone. "How is he really?" I asked quietly. Eleanor's carefully composed expression faltered. "The doctors give him days, perhaps a week. He's in considerable pain but refusing additional medication. Says he wants clarity for this gathering." She squeezed my hand. "He specifically asked for you to be here, Kimberly. Whatever is happening between you and Clark, Henry still considers you family." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. The study door opened as we approached, revealing Jonathan helping his father into a wheelchair. Henry Reynolds had always been an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the commanding presence of a man accustomed to authority. Now he was shockingly diminished, his once robust frame gaunt, skin sallow against his dark suit. Yet his eyes, those piercing blue Reynolds eyes that all 3 of my children had inherited, remained alert and keen as they found mine. "Kimberly," he said, his voice weaker but still carrying that distinctive resonance. "Thank you for bringing the children." "Of course," I replied, stepping forward to kiss his papery cheek. They wouldn't miss seeing their grandfather. Behind Henry, Jonathan and Kylie stood like reluctant sentinels. Jonathan nodded tersely, his expression a complex mix of emotions. Kylie's eyes were red-rimmed, her smile strained as she greeted me with a formal hug that communicated volumes about her unsettled state. "Where's Clark?" Henry asked, glancing toward the doorway. "He'll be here shortly," Eleanor assured him. "Hospital business." Henry made a dismissive sound. "Always working. Even today." There was something in his tone, disappointment perhaps, or resignation, that suggested this was a familiar criticism. The children were summoned to greet their grandfather, a bittersweet scene as they carefully hugged his frail form, instinctively, gentle with him in a way that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. "Strong boys," Henry remarked, studying the twins with particular intensity. "Good Reynolds stock." I caught Jonathan's gaze over Henry's head, the shared knowledge hanging between us like an invisible thread. The afternoon proceeded with the strained politeness of people awaiting an inevitable end, both of Henry's life, and, though they didn't know it yet, of certain family illusions. Eleanor gave me a tour of recent renovations. Kylie helped the children make cards for their grandfather, and Jonathan disappeared into the wine cellar to select bottles for dinner. I excused myself to the powder room, needing a moment alone to steady my nerves. The cream-colored envelope sat in my clutch, innocuous-looking but devastating in its contents. Tonight, once Clark arrived, once dinner was served, once the family was gathered around the formal dining table that had witnessed 5 generations of Reynolds celebrations and sorrows, then the truth would finally emerge. My phone buzzed with a text from Clark. "Running late, bringing Jade for support. Tell my parents." The audacity was breathtaking. Bringing his mistress to his dying father's family dinner, to an occasion meant for intimate family goodbyes. I showed the message to Eleanor, whose lips thinned into a tight line. "How utterly like Clark," she said quietly. "Henry won't like it, but we'll manage." Jade arrived with Clark an hour later, wearing an inappropriately low-cut black dress and too much jewelry for what was essentially a family wake. I watched from the upstairs landing as they entered, Clark's hand possessively at the small of her back, her smile too bright for the somber occasion. "Mrs. Reynolds?" Jade acknowledged me with forced politeness when we eventually crossed paths in the sitting room. "Thank you for being so understanding about tonight." "It's Dr. Thompson, isn't it?" I replied pleasantly. "From neurology?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Yes, that's right." "How fortunate that your appendectomy complications led to such a rewarding relationship with your surgeon." The color drained from her face as she realized I knew about their true history. Before she could respond, Clark appeared at her side, his expression hardening as he assessed our interaction. "Kimberly," he greeted me coolly, "you're looking well." "As are you, Clark. Your father's been asking for you." Tension crackled between us like static electricity. 3 months ago, this man had been my husband, my partner, the father of my children. Now he was almost a stranger, one whose true character I was only beginning to comprehend. Dinner was announced at 7, the formal dining room a study in old-world elegance. The massive mahogany table gleamed under candlelight, family silver and crystal arranged with precision on the crisp white tablecloth. Seating had been carefully considered. Henry at the head despite his wheelchair, Eleanor opposite him, Clark, and Jade to Henry's right, Jonathan and Kylie to his left, with me and the children arranged between, the perfect tableau for the drama about to unfold. As the first course was served, Eleanor's traditional lobster bisque, I noticed the strained interactions around me. Jonathan avoided looking directly at Clark, while Kylie's knuckles were white around her water glass. Eleanor maintained gracious conversation despite her obvious disapproval of Jade's presence. The children, sensing the adult tension, were unusually subdued. Only Clark seemed at ease, periodically checking his phone beneath the table, while engaging his father in talk of hospital politics. His confidence was palpable, the assurance of a man who believed he had orchestrated everything perfectly, from the fertility deception to the imminent inheritance. "Before we continue," Henry announced as the soup plates were being cleared, "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Family has always been everything to me." He raised his glass in a toast, his hand trembling slightly but his voice firm. "To the Reynolds legacy, and to the future generations who will carry it forward." As glasses clinked around the table, Clark's gaze met mine briefly. Smug, triumphant, secure in his position. He had no idea that the envelope in my purse was about to destroy everything he had spent 13 years building. The storm was gathering, tensions mounting with each passing moment. And soon, very soon, lightning would strike at the heart of the Reynolds family. The main course arrived, herb-crusted rack of lamb, Henry's favorite, served with practiced precision by the household staff. The formal dining room hummed with the muted sounds of silverware against fine china and the careful conversation of people avoiding what truly mattered. "The hospital board is finalizing next year's budget," Clark was saying to his father. "The neurosurgery department is getting a substantial increase, thanks in large part to your influence." Henry nodded, though his attention seemed to drift. "And the children's wing renovation?" "On schedule for completion next spring," Eleanor interjected. "The Reynolds name will be prominently featured, of course." I watched Clark carefully, his practiced charm, his strategic conversation, the occasional glance at his phone beneath the table. He radiated the confidence of a man who believed he controlled every variable in the equation of his life. He had no idea I had changed the formula entirely. "More wine, Kimberly?" Jonathan offered, breaking my reverie. Our eyes met as he poured, a silent communication passing between us. He had been quiet throughout dinner, the weight of our shared knowledge evident in the tension around his mouth. Beside him, Kylie maintained a brittle smile, her gaze occasionally drifting to the twins with a new awareness that was both wondering and wounded. "Grandpa," Lily said suddenly, "did Dad look like Uncle Jonathan when he was our age?" The innocent question sent a jolt around the table. Eleanor fumbled with her fork. Jonathan stared intently at his plate. Clark's eyes narrowed slightly. "Very much so," Henry replied, unaware of the subtext. "The Reynolds genes run strong. You can see it in your cousins, too. Those blue eyes, the shape of the jaw." He chuckled weakly. "Good breeding, as my own father would have said." "Speaking of family resemblance," I said carefully, "I was looking through old photo albums recently. It's remarkable how much the twins resemble Jonathan at their age." Clark's head snapped up, his expression suddenly alert. "What an odd observation," he said, his tone light but eyes hard. "Not really," I continued. "Family genetics are fascinating, aren't they? Which traits are inherited? Which skip generations? Which appear unexpectedly?" Eleanor looked confused. "I suppose they do favor Jonathan slightly around the eyes. All the Reynolds men have those eyes, though." "Yes," I agreed. "The Reynolds traits, so important to the family legacy." Clark set down his wine glass with controlled precision. "Perhaps we could discuss something more appropriate for the occasion. Father doesn't need to hear trivial observations about genetics." "Actually," Henry interjected, his frail voice surprisingly firm, "I find the subject quite relevant. The continuation of bloodlines has always been of particular interest to me, especially now." I felt a surge of gratitude toward the old man, unaware as he was that he had just opened the door I needed. "I understand completely," I said, meeting Henry's gaze directly. "In fact, I've taken a special interest in genetics myself recently. The science has advanced remarkably. What DNA can reveal about family connections is quite extraordinary." Clark's knuckles whitened around his knife. "Kimberly," he warned quietly, The children looked between us, sensing the rising tension. Jade shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Clark," I replied evenly, "you've always emphasized the importance of truth in our family. Isn't that right?" Before he could respond, I reached for my purse hanging on the chair beside me. The cream-colored envelope felt heavy in my hand as I withdrew it, the weight of 13 years of deception condensed into a few sheets of paper. "Henry," I addressed my father-in-law directly, "you've always treated me as a daughter. Your kindness over the years has meant the world to me. That's why I believe you deserve the truth, especially now." "What is this about?" Eleanor asked, looking bewildered. "Yes, Kimberly," Clark said, his voice dangerously soft. "What exactly is this about?" The moment had arrived, that crystalline instant when the past and future balanced on the edge of a blade. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. When Clark asked for a divorce 3 months ago, I began investigating certain inconsistencies in our financial records. What I discovered led me to much deeper concerns, specifically about the fertility treatments we underwent to conceive our children. Henry's attention sharpened visibly. "Go on," he said. "Kimberly, this is hardly the time or place," Clark began. "It's exactly the time and place," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly steady. "Before Henry makes his final arrangements, before the terms of the Reynolds Trust are executed, certain facts need to be established." I slid the envelope across the table toward Henry. "Congratulations on your freedom, Clark," I said, echoing his cold dismissal from months earlier. "I think you'll find this interesting reading." Clark's face drained of color as he recognized the Westlake Medical Center logo on the envelope. With remarkable self-control, he reached for it before his father could, but Henry was quicker than his frail appearance suggested. "I believe this is addressed to me," the old man said firmly, taking the envelope himself. The table fell silent as Henry opened it with trembling fingers, removing the DNA test results. I watched as his expression transformed. Confusion, then disbelief, then a cold fury that seemed to momentarily restore his former vigor. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the silence. "DNA test results," I explained calmly. "Confirming that Clark is not the biological father of my children. Jonathan is." The room erupted in reactions. Eleanor's shocked gasp, Jade's confusion, Kylie's quiet intensity, Jonathan's grim resignation. The children looked alarmed, sensing a seismic shift without understanding its nature. "This is absurd," Clark declared, attempting to regain control. "Some desperate ploy to effect the divorce settlement." "It's no ploy," I cut him off. "It's scientific fact, supported by hospital records, witness testimony, and DNA verification. You ensured your sperm was never used during our IVF treatments. Clark, you falsified medical records. You lied to me for 13 years about our children's very existence." Henry was scanning the documents, his medical training allowing him to interpret the clinical language. "These tests show a 0% probability that Clark is the father, and a 99.99% probability that Jonathan is," he stated flatly, looking up at his eldest son with cold assessment. "Explain yourself." Clark's composure cracked momentarily before he rallied. "This is clearly fabricated. Kimberly is unstable, bitter about our divorce." "I saw the records myself, Clark," Jonathan interrupted, speaking for the first time. "The fertility clinic at Westlake systematically altered procedures under your supervision. You diagnosed me with fertility issues I didn't have, then used my sperm for Kimberly's IVF procedures without either of our knowledge or consent." The pieces were falling into place visibly for Henry as he looked between his sons. "The trust," he said quietly. "The biological heirs requirement." "Yes," I confirmed. Clark needed biological male heirs to secure the inheritance. When he learned Jonathan had viable sperm but was unaware of it, he created the perfect solution: use his brother's genetic material while claiming the children, as his own. "You violated your medical oath," Henry said, staring at Clark with growing disgust. "You manipulated your own brother. You lied to your wife. You treated these children, my grandchildren, as pawns in a financial scheme." "It wasn't like that," Clark insisted, desperation edging into his voice. "I gave this family what it needed: heirs, continuation, legacy. What does it matter where the sperm came from? The children exist because of me." "Because of your fraud," Henry corrected coldly. The magnitude of the deception seemed to physically affect the old man. He closed his eyes briefly, gathering himself before turning to Jonathan. "You knew nothing of this?" he asked. "Not until Kimberly approached me last week," Jonathan confirmed. "Clark diagnosed me with severe fertility issues years ago. A diagnosis I accepted without question. I never imagined he would—" His voice faltered. "Use you to secure his inheritance," Henry finished for him, "while ensuring you and Kylie believed you could never have children of your own." The calculated cruelty of this final detail hung in the air like poison. Kylie's quiet tears spoke volumes about years of painful treatments, dashed hopes, and self-recrimination, all unnecessarily endured because of Clark's manipulation. "Dad?" Lily's voice cut through the tension, small and confused. "What's happening? What does biological father mean?" All eyes turned to the children, their innocent faces registering the distress of the adults around them. In the heat of confrontation, I'd momentarily forgotten they were present, witnesses to the implosion of everything they believed about their family. The revelation was complete, but its aftermath was just beginning. And the children, the true victims of Clark's deception, now needed protection more than ever. "Children," Eleanor said with remarkable composure, rising from her seat. "Why don't we take some dessert in the garden room? I believe there's ice, cream." Her instinct to remove the children from the escalating confrontation was perfect. With gentle but firm guidance, she shepherded Lily and the twins from the dining room, their confused faces glancing back at the adults with uncertainty. Once they were gone, the carefully constructed civility of the dinner collapsed entirely. "You disgust me," Henry said to Clark, his voice low but vibrating with rage. "In my 60 years of medical practice, I've never witnessed such a profound violation of ethics, of family trust, of basic human decency." Clark's demeanor shifted, the pretense of innocence abandoned now that the children were no longer present. "What did you expect?" he demanded. "You set the terms: biological heirs or no inheritance. Jonathan couldn't produce children naturally. I found a solution that gave this family exactly what it wanted: continuation of the Reynolds bloodline." "Without consent," Jonathan interjected. "You used my genetic material without my knowledge. You let Kylie and me suffer through years of fertility treatments knowing they were unnecessary. You watched us grieve children we thought we couldn't have while raising our biological children as your own." Jade looked between them all, bewilderment giving way to horrified understanding. "Clark, what have you done?" she whispered. "What needed to be done?" he snapped, his mask of charm completely dissolved. "Everyone got what they wanted. Father got his precious heirs. Kimberly got her children. The children themselves got privileged lives. The only thing that matters is the outcome. The means always matter," Henry countered. "Character matters. Truth matters." "Easy platitudes from a man born into wealth," Clark said bitterly. "You've never had to fight for your place, to prove yourself worthy of the Reynolds name. Everything was handed to you." "And you think this deception makes you worthy?" Henry asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "You think manipulating your brother, lying to your wife, treating children as financial assets demonstrates the character I wanted in my successor?" I watched Clark carefully during this exchange. Something was happening beneath his anger, a recalculation, a strategic shift. His eyes darted to the documents in Henry's hands. to the doorway where the children had exited, to Jonathan, to me. He was reassessing, looking for leverage, for escape. Those test results prove nothing definitive, he said suddenly, changing tactics. They could easily be manipulated. Kimberly has every motivation to fabricate evidence that secures her financial future through the children. I have the original records from Westlake, I countered calmly. Dr. Brooks and Amanda Fletcher have provided sworn statements about your direct involvement in falsifying fertility procedures. The DNA tests merely confirm what the documentation already established. You've been planning this, Clark accused, eyes narrowing. All those months of playing the agreeable ex-wife, the reasonable co-parent, it was just a cover while you built your case. Yes, I acknowledged without apology. 13 years, Clark. You had 13 years of living your lie. I needed 3 months to expose it. Kylie, who had been largely silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly spoke. What happens to the children now? Her voice was strained but determined. Biologically, they're Jonathan's and Kimberly's. Legally, they're Clark's and Kimberly's. Emotionally, they know Clark as their father, Jonathan as their uncle. She looked between all of who's thinking about what this means for them. Her question cut through the anger and recrimination, focusing everyone on the most innocent victims of Clark's scheme. The children's welfare comes first, I said firmly. Whatever happens legally or financially, they need stability, honesty, appropriate to their ages, and the assurance that they are loved regardless of biology. Jonathan nodded in agreement. They've known me as Uncle Jonathan their entire lives. That relationship doesn't need to change immediately or dramatically. There's time to figure out what role makes sense for everyone. Henry watched this exchange with evident approval. At least some members of this family understand what truly matters, he observed. Clark's expression darkened further. This touching concern for the children's feelings won't change legal reality, he said coldly. I'm still listed as their father on the birth certificates. I've been their legal parent for 13 years. No court will sever that relationship based on a DNA test and some questionable medical records. Actually, I responded, when those medical records establish fraud, coercion, and potentially criminal conduct, the courts will have significant grounds to reconsider everything: parental rights, financial support, even professional licensing. You wouldn't dare, Clark hissed. Think of what this would do to the children if it became public. The Reynolds name dragged through tabloids, their origins becoming playground gossip. I've thought of nothing else, I assured him, which is why I've prepared several options. That could resolve this situation more privately, if you're willing to be reasonable. Henry interjected, his voice weaker but still commanding. Before we discuss those options, I need to be clear about what happens with the trust. He looked directly at Clark. You are hereby removed as a beneficiary. You violated every principle this family stands for, every value I've tried to instill. You can't do that, Clark protested. The terms are legally binding. The terms specifically allow for disinheritance in cases of criminal conduct or gross moral failure, Henry interrupted. My attorneys will make the appropriate adjustments immediately. Clark's face flushed with fury. This is what it's always been about, isn't it? Making Jonathan the favorite, positioning him to take everything despite his mediocrity. This has always been about your choices, Clark, Henry replied sadly. Only yours. The dining room door opened suddenly as Eleanor returned, her expression grave. The children are settled with ice cream and a movie, she reported. But they're confused and frightened. They need answers soon. I'll go to them, I said, rising from my seat. I'm coming too, Clark announced, moving toward the door. Jonathan stood quickly, blocking his path. I don't think that's appropriate. Right now. They're my children, Clark insisted, his voice rising. I've raised them for 13 years. Whatever DNA might say, I'm their father. A father who used them as pawns in a financial scheme, I reminded him, who was willing to destroy his own brother's happiness to secure his inheritance. who lied to everyone in this room for over a decade. "Get out of my house," Henry ordered suddenly, his frail body somehow commanding despite the wheelchair. "You're no longer welcome here, Clark. Not tonight, not ever." "You'd choose them over your own son?" Clark demanded, gesturing toward Jonathan and me. "I'm choosing integrity," Henry replied simply. "Something you appear to have abandoned long ago." Clark looked around the table, at his father's disgust, his brother's righteous anger, his mother's disappointed shock, his mistress's growing horror, his wife's calm resolve. Whatever calculation he was making, whatever strategy he was formulating, seemed to falter in the face of this united condemnation. "This isn't over," he finally said, his voice cold with threat. "Not legally, not personally." "Actually," I responded quietly, "it is. Your father knows the truth. The DNA evidence is conclusive. Your career at Westlake is finished once the ethics investigation concludes. The only question remaining is how much more damage you want to inflict on those children before you accept reality." He stared at me for a long moment, hatred and calculation warring in his expression. Then, without another word, he turned to Jade. "We're leaving." She hesitated, looking between Clark and the rest of us with newfound uncertainty. "Clark, maybe we should—" "Now," he commanded sharply. With visible reluctance, she gathered her things and followed him from the dining room. Moments later, we heard the front door slam and the sound of tires on gravel as they drove away. Exhausted silence fell over the remaining family members. The confrontation was over, but its reverberations were just beginning. And now came perhaps the most challenging task of all, helping 3 innocent children understand how the adults they trusted most had failed them so profoundly. The garden room at the Reynolds estate had always been a sanctuary, a glass-enclosed space filled with tropical plants, comfortable seating, and a small koi pond that had fascinated the children since they were toddlers. Now it became the setting for perhaps the most difficult conversation of my life. Lily sat rigidly on a wicker sofa, her 12-year-old face a study in contained emotion. The twins, less adept at hiding their feelings, fidgeted nervously on either side of her. All 3 looked up as Jonathan, Kylie, and I entered, followed more slowly by Eleanor pushing Henry's wheelchair. "Where's Dad?" Ethan asked immediately. I took a deep breath, settling on the ottoman across from them. "Your father had to leave. We need to talk about some important things that might be confusing or upsetting." "You're getting divorced," Lily stated flatly. "We already know that." "Yes, we are," I confirmed. "But there's something else you need to understand. Something about our family that we just learned ourselves." Jonathan and Kylie sat nearby, their presence supportive but understandably awkward. How does one explain to children that the man they've called father is not biologically related to them, while the man they've known as uncle actually is? After consulting with a child psychologist that morning, anticipating this moment might come, I had prepared an age-appropriate explanation. Now, facing their innocent, confused faces, all my careful preparation seemed inadequate. "Remember when we talked about how babies are made?" I began gently. "How sometimes parents need doctors to help them." Nods all around. We'd always been open about their IVF origins, explaining in simple terms how doctors had helped create them. "Well, we recently discovered that when the doctors were helping us, there was a mistake with the medical records." "What kind of mistake?" Lily asked, her perceptiveness sometimes a challenge and sometimes a gift. I exchanged glances with Jonathan, who nodded slightly. "The doctors were supposed to use Dad's sperm, his special cells, to help create you. But instead, they accidentally used Uncle Jonathan's cells." A moment of confused silence as they processed this information. "So, Uncle Jonathan is our real dad?" 9-year-old Alex asked, his brow furrowed. "Biologically speaking, yes," I answered carefully. "But family is about more than just biology. It's about love and care and being there for each other. Did Dad know? Lily asked suddenly, her eyes sharp with perception beyond her years. Another glance at Jonathan. This was the hardest part. How much truth could they handle? We believe he did, I said finally, choosing honesty with careful boundaries. And that's part of why he and I are having such a difficult time right now. Is that why he left tonight? Because he's not really our dad? Ethan's voice wavered. He left because he's upset about many things, I explained, sidestepping the full complexity. But I want you to know that nothing changes how much you are loved. Not by me, not by your grandparents, not by Uncle Jonathan and Aunt Kylie. What? Do we call you now? Alex asked Jonathan directly, his young face serious. Jonathan visibly struggled with the question. You can still call me Uncle Jonathan if that feels right to you. We don't need to change anything right away. We have time to figure this out together. Henry, who had been silently observing, spoke up. Children. Family is more complicated than just blood. It's about choices, about how we treat each other. Your mother has always made good choices for you. Trust her now. Eleanor wiped away tears. No matter what happens, you are Reynolds' children. Nothing will ever change that. The conversation continued for another hour. Questions answered honestly but age-appropriately. Reassurances offered. Tears shed and comforted. The children's reactions ranged from confusion to anger to sorrow, sometimes cycling through all, 3 in minutes. Lily, always the most analytical, asked the practical questions. Will we still live in our house? Will we still see Dad? Do we have to tell people at school? The twins were more emotional, with Alex withdrawing into silence, while Ethan became tearful. But Dad taught me to throw a baseball, he said at one point, as if this simple fact could undo the complex reality we were presenting. By the end, exhaustion had claimed them all. Eleanor suggested they stay overnight at the estate, a familiar comfort zone that would give everyone time to process. As I tucked them into the guest room beds they'd used during countless family gatherings, Lily caught my hand. Mom, did you know? Before tonight? I found out recently, I admitted. I needed to be sure before saying anything. She nodded, her young face too serious. Dad lied to everyone, didn't he? That's why Grandpa was so angry. Yes, I said simply. But that's his burden to carry, not yours. Are we going to be okay? She asked, suddenly sounding much younger than her 12 years. I gathered her close, including the twins in the embrace. We are absolutely going to be okay. Different, but okay. I promise. After the children finally fell asleep, the adults gathered in Henry's study, the wood-paneled room where generations of Reynolds family decisions had been made. Despite his frailty, Henry insisted on addressing the practical matters immediately. I've instructed my attorneys to rewrite the trust. He began without preamble. Clark will receive a nominal amount, enough to prevent a successful challenge, but nothing more. The bulk of the estate will be divided between Jonathan and the children, with you as their trustee, Kimberly. That's not necessary, I started. To protest. It is absolutely necessary, Henry countered firmly. Those children are Reynolds by blood and by right. They will be provided for as such. What about Clark's threats? Jonathan asked. He won't just walk away from this. I've already spoken with Judge Matthews, Chloe Winters said, having arrived at my urgent summons. We're filing for an emergency custody order first thing tomorrow morning based on the DNA evidence and medical fraud documentation. Given the circumstances, the judge is inclined to grant it pending a full hearing. And the medical ethics violations? I asked. Agent Michael Dawson from the Healthcare Fraud Task Force is building the case, Chloe confirmed. The evidence from Amanda Fletcher and Dr. Brooks, combined with the documentation you've gathered, presents a compelling argument for criminal charges. Clark will fight, Eleanor said quietly. He's never accepted defeat gracefully. Let him fight, Henry replied, a hint of his former strength returning to his voice. He'll find the Reynolds resources aligned against him for once. As the discussion continued into the night, legal strategies, financial arrangements, immediate security concerns, I found myself standing by the study window, looking out at the manicured grounds illuminated by moonlight. This estate had always represented the Reynolds dynasty to me, imposing, traditional, immutable. Now I understood that institutions are only as solid as the principles of those who maintain them. My phone vibrated with a text from Clark. "This isn't over. I'll take everything, the children, the house, your reputation. You have no idea what I'm capable of." I showed the message to Chloe, who immediately added it to her documentation of threats. "Classic intimidation tactic," she observed. "He's desperate and lashing out." Perhaps I should have felt frightened by his threat. Instead, I felt only a calm resolve. Clark had underestimated me for 13 years, dismissed my intelligence, my resilience, my capacity for strategic thinking. His greatest miscalculation was believing that the perfect, agreeable wife he'd chosen would never become his most formidable opponent. The battle was just beginning. But for the first time in months, I was no longer fighting alone. Clark's retaliation came with the precision and calculation I had come to expect from him. 3 days after the family dinner, I received notice that he had filed an emergency petition for full custody, claiming I was mentally unstable and had fabricated the DNA evidence in a vindictive attempt to alienate the children from him. "This is standard scorched earth tactics," Chloe assured me as we reviewed the filing in her office. "He's trying to control the narrative and put you on the defensive." More disturbing was the whisper campaign that began circulating through our social circle. Friends called with concerned questions. Was I having a breakdown? Had the divorce pushed me to invent wild accusations? Was I keeping the children from Clark? "He's calling everyone we know," I told Jonathan during one of our daily check-in calls, painting me as an unstable, vengeful ex-wife. "Eleanor's getting similar calls," Jonathan confirmed. "Old family friends asking if she's concerned about your condition. It's all very carefully worded. Expressions of concern, not direct accusations. Clark knows exactly how to manipulate perception." The children returned to school with our agreement that they would simply say their parents were going through a divorce. No details about the paternity situation until things stabilized. But even this protective measure proved inadequate when the twins came home in tears, reporting that a classmate had told them, "Your dad says your mom is crazy and making up lies." Clark had apparently shared his version with the parents of the children's friends, ensuring the gossip would filter down to the playground. "That's it," I said to Chloe that evening. "I've tried to keep this private for the children's sake, but Clark is forcing my hand." "We've got the emergency custody hearing tomorrow," she reminded me. "Judge Matthews has already reviewed the DNA evidence and Dr. Brooks's testimony. Stay focused on that." The courthouse hallway the next morning felt like a gauntlet. Clark arrived with his attorney, not the divorce lawyer he'd been using, but Gerald Winston, an aggressive litigator known for high-profile custody battles. More telling was Jade's absence. She had apparently reconsidered her position after witnessing the family confrontation. "Kimberly," Clark acknowledged coldly as our legal teams prepared to enter the courtroom, "there's still time to withdraw these absurd allegations. For the children's sake." "You mean for your sake?" I replied quietly. "The DNA evidence isn't going away, Clark." His expression hardened. "DNA isn't the only factor in determining parentage. 13 years of being their father counts for something legally. 13 years of knowing they weren't biologically yours while letting everyone, including them, believe otherwise," I countered. "That's called fraud, not fatherhood." The hearing itself was closed to the public, but word spread quickly through the hospital and our social circles. Judge Matthews, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed the evidence methodically. The DNA test results, Dr. Brooks's sworn testimony, Amanda Fletcher's documentation, and the threatening text messages Clark had sent since the revelation. Clark's attorney argued forcefully that biological paternity was just one factor in determining custody, that Clark had been the children's father in every meaningful way for 13 years, and that my actions constituted parental alienation. Dr. Reynolds has an exemplary record as a father, Winston insisted. Mrs. Reynolds is attempting to use this unfortunate medical error to punish him for ending their marriage. Medical error? Judge Matthews raised an eyebrow. The documentation suggests deliberate manipulation of fertility procedures, Mr. Winston. That's fraud, not error. When the judge issued her ruling, it was decisive. Temporary sole custody to me, supervised visitation for Clark pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services, and an order for psychological evaluations of all parties involved. This court takes a dim view of using children as pawns, Judge Matthews stated firmly. Dr. Reynolds's apparent deception regarding paternity, followed by his attempts to discredit Mrs. Reynolds rather than address the substantive evidence, raises serious concerns about his judgment and priorities. Outside the courtroom, Clark confronted me one final time, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You've turned my parents against me, stolen my children, ruined my career. I hope it was worth it. I didn't do any of those things, Clark, I replied calmly. Your choices did. As he walked away, I noticed the slump in his shoulders, the first sign that he might be recognizing the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just the inheritance or the children, but his reputation, his parents' respect, his carefully constructed identity as the successful, honorable Reynolds' son. The battle was far from over, but the first decisive victory had been won. And with Henry Reynolds's health declining rapidly, Clark was running out of time to recapture what his deception had cost him. Henry Reynolds passed away on a Thursday morning, slipping away peacefully in his sleep with Eleanor by his side. The family gathered at the estate that afternoon, Jonathan and Kylie, the children and I, close friends and colleagues, all except Clark, who had been explicitly excluded from his father's final days. He asked me to give you this, Eleanor said, handing me a sealed envelope as we sat together in the quiet of the study after the initial flurry of arrangements had been made. Inside was a handwritten letter from Henry, dated just 2 days earlier. Kimberly, by the time you read this, I will have departed this life. I want you to know that discovering the truth about my grandchildren, painful as it was, brought me a certain peace. The children are Reynolds by blood through Jonathan, exactly as they should be. Their future is secure. I failed as a father with Clark. Perhaps my emphasis on legacy and bloodlines contributed to his corruption. For that, I bear some responsibility. Please tell the children that their grandfather loved them completely, regardless of the circumstances of their conception. Biology matters far less than the love and care you have given them. With respect and affection, Henry Reynolds I folded the letter carefully, touched by the old man's capacity for reflection even in his final days. He rewrote the will the day after the dinner, Eleanor informed me. Everything is as he promised. Trusts for the children, provisions for Jonathan and Kylie, and a nominal amount for Clark that will be difficult to contest. How are you holding up? I asked, concerned about this woman who had lost her husband, of 60 years, and effectively lost her eldest son in the span of a single week. Eleanor's smile was sad, but composed. I've had a lifetime with Henry. We said everything that needed saying. As for Clark, she hesitated. A mother never stops loving her child, but I cannot condone what he's done. Sometimes love must be firm enough to allow consequences. The funeral 3 days later was dignified and well attended, a testament to Henry's standing in the medical community and beyond. Clark arrived just as the service began, taking a seat in the back row, deliberately separated from the family. Jade was noticeably absent. I later learned she had ended their relationship, unwilling to be associated with the growing scandal. The children handled the funeral with remarkable grace. Though they had known their grandfather was terminally ill, his death represented another, destabilizing change in their rapidly transforming world. Lily remained close to me throughout the service, while the twins sought comfort from both me and, increasingly, from Jonathan, who had begun establishing a careful, thoughtful relationship with them as their biological father. "Grandpa told me I have the Reynolds eyes," Alex confided as we drove home from the cemetery. "He said even though things are confusing, I should always remember I belong to the family." Grandpa was right, I assured him, meeting his gaze. Those distinctive blue Reynolds eyes in the rearview mirror. The weeks following Henry's death brought a cascade of changes. The medical ethics investigation into Clark's conduct at Westlake gained momentum, with multiple former patients and staff members coming forward with similar experiences of procedural irregularities and falsified records. The hospital board placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome. Jonathan and Kylie began regular counseling to process their complex emotions about the children's paternity and the years of fertility treatments they had endured unnecessarily. Their marriage, strained initially by the revelations, was gradually strengthening through honest communication and shared purpose. "We're considering fertility treatment again," Kylie told me over coffee one afternoon. "Now that we know Jonathan doesn't actually have the issues Clark diagnosed." "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. "Terrified. Hopeful." She smiled wryly. "Having 3 biological children already in the world is the strangest form of reassurance." The children's adjustment continued in fits and starts. Some days seemed almost normal. Others brought tears, questions, confusion. The twins were gradually accepting Jonathan's new role in their lives, though they still referred to him as Uncle Jonathan. Lily, older and more perceptive, struggled more with the deliberate nature of Clark's deception. "Why didn't he just want us as his own kids?" she asked one night as I tucked her in. "I think he did, in his way," I answered, choosing my words carefully. "But he also wanted other things he thought were important at the time. He made very bad choices trying to have everything exactly as he wanted it." "Do we have to keep seeing him?" The supervised visitations had been uncomfortable for everyone involved. "For now, yes," I explained. "But only if you feel comfortable." "Your feelings matter." Clark himself seemed to be unraveling gradually. His once immaculate appearance had deteriorated. Unshaven, clothes slightly rumpled, dark circles under his eyes during visitations. The facade of the brilliant, successful surgeon was cracking under the weight of public scrutiny and professional investigation. His attorney filed a motion contesting Henry's will, as expected, but even this felt like a reflexive action rather than a strategic one. The carefully documented evidence of his medical fraud made his legal position increasingly untenable. "He's running out of options," Chloe observed during one of our regular updates. "The question now is whether he'll eventually accept reality or continue fighting until he loses everything." As spring turned to summer, our new reality gradually stabilized. Not perfect, not what any of us had imagined, but increasingly authentic. A family reconfigured by truth rather than constrained by deception. The legal proceedings against Clark culminated in a series of hearings during late summer. Rather than the public trial I had feared might traumatize the children, the mounting evidence led to a negotiated resolution that addressed both the criminal and civil aspects of his conduct. On a sweltering August morning, Chloe and I arrived at the courthouse for the final settlement conference. Clark sat on the opposite side of the conference room, flanked by his attorneys. His appearance shocked me. Gaunt, gray-tinged, the confident surgeon now diminished by the consequences of his actions. "Before we begin," Judge Matthews said, "I want to confirm that all parties understand this agreement is binding and concludes all pending litigation related to these matters." We nodded our assent. The terms were read into the record. Clark would surrender his medical license in lieu of criminal prosecution for medical fraud. He would relinquish all parental rights to the children, acknowledging Jonathan as their biological father. The divorce would be finalized with a financial settlement that, while generous, represented a fraction of what the Reynolds fortune would have provided him. His challenge to Henry's will would be withdrawn. In return, we would not pursue additional criminal charges related to the fertility clinic misconduct, allowing Clark to avoid prison time. The medical ethics violations would be reported to the licensing board, but characterized as procedural failures rather than deliberate fraud. Dr. Reynolds, do you accept these terms? Judge Matthews asked. Clark stared at the table for a long moment before raising his eyes. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Reynolds? Yes, Your Honor. With those simple affirmations, 13 years of deception were legally resolved. The judge signed the orders, ending Clark's legal claim to the children, to the Reynolds fortune, and to his medical career. As we left the conference room, Clark approached me in the hallway. Was it worth it? He asked, his voice lacking the confidence that had once defined him. Destroying everything we built? I didn't destroy anything, Clark. I simply exposed the truth. He shook his head slowly. Truth is overrated, Kimberly. We were happy in our fiction. You were happy, I corrected. The rest of us were living a lie we didn't choose. Something like regret flickered across his face. The children will be fine, I finished for him. They have people who love them honestly now. He nodded once, then turned and walked away down the courthouse corridor. I watched him go. This man I had loved, built a life with, raised children with, now a stranger retreating from the ruins of his carefully constructed deception. That evening, I gathered with Jonathan, Kylie, and Eleanor on the patio of what was now legally confirmed as my home. The children played in the yard, their laughter a counterpoint to the serious conversation of the adults. It's finally over, Eleanor said, watching her grandchildren with tired eyes. The legal part is, I agreed. The rest, the healing, the rebuilding, that's just beginning. Jonathan raised his glass in a quiet toast. To truth, however difficult, and to whatever comes next. We clinked glasses as the summer sunset painted the sky in shades of possibility. Fall brought a fresh start. New school year, new routines, new family dynamics gradually taking shape. The children adapted with the remarkable resilience I had always admired in them, though each processed the changes in their own way. Lily, entering 7th grade, channeled her emotions into academic achievement and her violin, practicing with an intensity that sometimes worried me. During one of our regular sessions with Dr. Morrison, the family therapist, she finally articulated what had been troubling her most. Everyone at school knows, she said quietly. Not the details, but that something big happened. That Dad isn't really my dad. That Uncle Jonathan is. That everything was a lie. Not everything, I gently corrected. The love in this family was never a lie. But I don't know who I am anymore, she persisted. Am I still Lily Reynolds? Am I supposed to feel different about Uncle Jonathan now? About Dad? Clark? Dr. Morrison leaned forward. Identity is more than biology, Lily. It's your experiences, your choices, your relationships. Those haven't changed, even if your understanding of them has. Can I still miss him sometimes? She asked, her voice small. Even after what he did? Of course you can, I assured her. Feelings don't have to make perfect sense. You can be angry and sad at the same time. You can miss someone even while recognizing they made terrible choices. The twins processed things differently. Less verbal about their emotions, they expressed themselves through behavior. Alex became temporarily regressed, seeking more physical affection and reassurance. Ethan turned outward, his energy sometimes spilling over into aggression on the soccer field. Jonathan navigated his new role with careful consideration, neither rushing to replace Clark nor maintaining the distance of a mere uncle. He attended school events, joined weekend outings, made himself available without imposing expectations. "I've been thinking about changing my last name," he mentioned during a family dinner in late October. "Legally, I mean. Back to my mother's maiden name, Harper." Eleanor looked surprised. "Why would you do that?" "The Reynolds name carries complications now," he explained carefully, mindful of the children listening. "A fresh start might be good for everyone." "Would we change our names too?" Alex asked, suddenly alert. "That would be up to you and your mom," Jonathan replied. "When you're older, you might decide what feels right for you." "I like being a Reynolds," Ethan declared. "Then that's who you are," I affirmed. "Names are important, but they don't define everything about us." As Halloween approached, the children threw themselves into costume planning with typical enthusiasm. Normalcy was returning in small, precious increments: homework routines, birthday parties, everyday squabbles over bathroom time in the mornings. Clark maintained his court-ordered distance, having relocated to Chicago for a pharmaceutical consulting position, a significant step down from his surgical career, but the best option available given his surrendered medical license. He sent birthday cards and occasional texts, these communications tinged with a formal politeness that spoke of his continued inability to truly understand what he had done. One evening, as I helped Lily with her science project, a family tree, with a genetic component ironically assigned by a teacher unaware of our situation, she looked up at me thoughtfully. "Mom, do you ever regret finding out the truth? Would it have been easier to just not know?" I considered her question carefully. Easier, maybe, but not better. Truth allows us to make real choices, to live authentically. Secrets and lies may seem protective, but they actually trap us. She nodded, adding another branch to her carefully drawn tree. "I think I understand now. Our family isn't broken. It's just different than we thought it was." From the mouth of a 12-year-old, wisdom that had taken me months of painful discovery to achieve. The holiday season arrived with its mixture of joy and complexity. Thanksgiving at Eleanor's house marked our first major celebration without Henry, without Clark, but with our new understanding of family connections. The empty chairs at the table represented both loss and liberation. "We should acknowledge what's changed," Eleanor said as we gathered around the dining table, "but also what remains constant: our love for each other, our gratitude for being together." Jonathan had embraced his role as the children's biological father while respecting the boundaries we'd all established. The children still called him Uncle Jonathan, but the relationship had evolved, deeper, more intentional, no longer constrained by secrets. "I'm thankful for truth," Lily offered during our traditional round of gratitude sharing. "Even when it's hard." Christmas brought its own challenges. The children wondered if gifts would arrive from Clark. They did, extravagant and impersonal, and whether we would maintain traditions from previous years. We created a careful blend, honoring meaningful rituals while introducing new ones that reflected our reconfigured family. Jonathan and Kylie joined us for Christmas morning, their presence no longer awkward but increasingly natural. The most remarkable gift came from Kylie, who announced quietly as we sipped hot chocolate by the fire, "We're expecting, due in June." The successful pregnancy, achieved naturally once Jonathan received proper medical evaluation, felt like a redemptive counterpoint to the deception that had shaped the past year. Life continuing, healing, creating new possibilities from painful truths. As January arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of my initial discovery of Clark's affair, I found myself increasingly reflective. Nearly a year had passed since that moment in our kitchen when I'd seen the text message that began unraveling 13 years of lies. So much had changed: our legal status, our family structure, our understanding of ourselves and each other. "You seem pensive," Jonathan observed during one of our regular co-parenting coffees. We'd established these meetings to discuss the children's needs and maintain healthy communication. I'm thinking about how different everything was a year ago, I admitted. How I thought I knew my life, my marriage, my children's origins. How completely I believed in something that wasn't real. It was real, he corrected gently. The love was real. Your mothering was real. The family bonds were real, even if the biological connections weren't what you thought. His perspective helped, as it often did. Jonathan's thoughtfulness had been a steady support throughout the tumultuous year. The children, too, marked the passage of time in their own ways. Ethan asked fewer questions about Clark. Alex developed a new interest in genetics, checking out library books on heredity and traits. Lily, approaching her 13th birthday, requested a special dinner with both Jonathan and me to discuss family stuff. During that dinner, she surprised us both with her clarity. "I've been thinking about what to call you," she told Jonathan seriously. "Uncle Jonathan doesn't feel right anymore, but Dad doesn't either. You can call me whatever feels comfortable," he assured her. "I think I'd like to try calling you Papa," she said carefully. "It's different, but still special." Jonathan's eyes glistened. "I'd be honored." As February approached, marking 1 year since the DNA test results had confirmed what Amanda Fletcher had revealed, I realized how much healing had occurred. Not perfect healing, not complete, but substantial progress towards something authentic. The truth had indeed set us free, though the path to that freedom had been more painful, more complicated, and ultimately more rewarding than I could have imagined when I first discovered Clark's betrayal. 1 year to the day after I slid the DNA test results across the Reynolds family dinner table, I stood on the balcony of my home, truly mine now, in both legal and emotional terms, watching the children play in the backyard below. The twins chased each other with water guns while Lily lounged on a blanket, alternating between her book and refereeing her brother's increasingly wet battle. So much had changed, yet here they were, laughing, arguing, growing, the essential core of my life unchanged despite the seismic shifts in our family structure. My interior design business had flourished in the past year, my creative energy no longer subdued by the effort of maintaining Clark's perfect image. I'd completed several major projects, including the redesign of the children's wing at Westlake Medical Center, a poetic reclaiming of space that had once been dominated by Clark's influence. Jonathan and Kylie had settled into their expanding roles in our lives. Their baby boy was due in 3 months, and the children were excited about their new cousin, though we all understood the complex biological reality that made the relationship more complicated than that simple term suggested. Dr. Brooks had become the new director of Westlake's revamped fertility clinic, with strict ethical protocols established to prevent future abuses. He'd asked me to serve on the patient advocacy board, a role I accepted after careful consideration. Using my experience to protect others felt like transforming pain into purpose. Clark remained in Chicago, his communications with the children, infrequent and formal. I had stopped trying to make sense of the man I had married, stopped looking for explanations that would somehow make his deception comprehensible. Some puzzles aren't meant to be solved, just acknowledged and set aside. Eleanor had sold the Reynolds estate, finding it too full of memories and too large for her needs. She'd moved to a comfortable townhouse closer to us, becoming more grandmother than mother-in-law as the legal ties to Clark dissolved and the emotional bonds with the children strengthened. As for me, the woman who had once defined herself as Dr. Clark Reynolds' wife, the perfect hostess, the supportive partner, I had discovered something surprising in the aftermath of betrayal. Myself. Not the self Clark had cultivated and controlled for 13 years, but something more authentic. A woman with opinions and ambitions of her own. A mother whose strength had been tested and confirmed. A person capable of strategic thinking, of righteous anger, of rebuilding after devastation. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. Jonathan and Kylie had arrived for our monthly family dinner, Another new tradition that helped reinforce our commitment to cooperative parenting. "Mom," Lily called from below. "Papa and Kylie are here." As I turned to go inside, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door, a woman I wouldn't have recognized 2 years ago. Not because of any dramatic physical change, but because of the certainty in her eyes, the confidence in her posture, the authenticity of her expression. The perfect life I thought we'd built had been a mirage, the cracks always there beneath, the polished surface. But what had emerged from those broken pieces was something stronger, a family bonded by truth rather than appearance, relationships chosen rather than prescribed. Clark had spent 13 years constructing a lie. I had spent 1 year dismantling it. And now, at last, I was free to write my own story. Messy, complicated, authentic, and absolutely mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.